guy's gonna be some senator one day.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Jesse Hughes Show. We have to do our ceremonial chair wine sip here. This stuff is so good. This stuff is so good. If you are not within the North Carolina orbit, if you are not a card-carrying member of the South, you have no idea what this stuff is. You gotta learn. You have got to learn. It is one of the best drinks. All right, let's get into it. So tonight we have several things planned out for you. Most excitingly, I have a pre-recorded interview I want to play with you that I did with Eric Conn from New Christendom Press. It's going to be a great conversation. I'm excited for you guys to see it. Before we get into that, there have been some pressing news stories over the last few weeks. Some very, very pressing news stories. The biggest of which has been that the Secretary of State, the Vice President, the National Security Advisor, and a few other people have a group chat. Is that it? That's the story here that the news media seems to be freaking out about. Oh, whoops. That's what people are up in arms about. The fact that the Vice President, the Secretary of State, I was trying to adjust my camera, sorry. The Vice President, the Secretary of State, the National Security, they have a group chat on an app called Signal, which if you are anywhere within the orbit of the right wing, you know what Signal is. I have Signal. Most of you probably have Signal. Most people have Signal that are on this side of this region of the political spectrum. It's a common app. It's not really something. The biggest concern that I've heard people freak out about is, oh, the messages delete after 24 hours. So therefore, what? FOIA request? You can't file a FOIA? Okay. They weren't discussing classified information. They were just talking about the same things that we've heard them talking about in public for months. And they were talking about it in the same way that we've heard them talking about it in public for months. There's nothing new here. There's nothing really. This doesn't seem like that big of a story to me. It doesn't seem like something that's worth spending so much time and effort going through and saying, did you hear? They have a Signal group chat. Okay. The biggest scandal here is the fact that this a reporter from The Atlantic, I think it's Jeffrey Goldberg, correct me if I'm wrong, the biggest scandal in all of this is how he was added in the first place. I've seen some people suggest, allegedly, covering my bases here, allegedly, that Mike Waltz, who is the National Security Advisor, allegedly has a relationship with this guy, has done public events with him, may have given money to him. I don't know. I'm not saying he added him to the group chat. I'm not saying that he's the reason he was in the group chat. I'm just saying, allegedly, some people, not me, but some people, are positing there might be a connection there. I don't know. I don't know for sure. I don't know the details. I cannot confirm nor deny any of this information. I am simply just commentating on what I've heard some people speculating about, and if anyone out there sees this and thinks that I'm spreading some kind of misinformation, I'm not. I'm not saying this is true. I'm not saying this is accurate. I'm not saying that this is connected in any way. I'm just saying some people have posed that theory. Do I believe it? I haven't seen enough evidence to believe it yet, but anyway, so this blew up because the left is grasping at literally anything that they can at this point because their numbers are going underwater. They're in the tank. They're quite frankly not looking good. The Democrat Party is the most unpopular it has been in decades. I think the last poll I saw had them at like around 29% approval. We are so back. We are so back. The Democrats are, it's so over for them, but we are so back. Um, it's crazy. It's crazy that what they will try to turn into this big scandal. And then you also had yesterday the White House. There's these there's this meme going around kind of. I think it's a meme where people are taking pictures and putting them in this like Japanese anime style. I don't know much about it. You can use Grok to do it. And the White House posted one of this illegal immigrant lady crying as she's being deported. She's reportedly a fentanyl dealer who has caused a lot of damage with fentanyl, and they posted this picture. I gotta see if I can find it. I can't talk about it and not show it. I can't. It's it's too good. It's actually too good. It's actually, let me see if I can find. I should have had this pulled up earlier. This is on me, but this is what happens when you do live shows and these things just randomly pop up. Um, where is this thing? White House. It's just too good. Whoever is running White House social media, one, I would love a job over this summer if you can provide. But two, this is y'all need a raise. Y'all, whoever's running the White House social media, y'all need a raise. And if y'all need a new intern, if y'all need a new intern who is if within the same spirit and will post funny stuff like this, I know a guy. Of course I know him. He's me. Um, where is this thing? I am not sure. While I'm finding this, another news story that actually just broke is that the Department of State has, oh, here it is. The Department of State has announced to Congress that USAID is officially being shut down, which is, of course, objectively a good thing. USAID was being used to funnel money into all sorts of insane things like sending billions of dollars worth of condoms to Gaza and doing research on atheism in Papua New Guinea. Like, can someone please give me a rational explanation as to why my tax dollars and why your tax dollars have to go to these programs that make little to no sense at all? I found the picture. I gotta show you guys this. This is just great. This is actually just amazing. Um, let's see if this pops up here. Aha. So, what we have here, what we have here is so they quote tweeted Virginia Basora Gonzalez, a previously deported alien felon convicted of fentanyl trafficking, was arrested by at IceGov in Philadelphia after illegally re-entering the U.S. She wept when she was taken into custody. Picture attached. So they got this lady here, and they took her into custody, and then they took this meme that's been going around, and they post the White House, the official White House account, in case you do not believe me, posted this. I I who is playing that music outside of my apartment? I this is just this is great. This is just great. I like I said, whoever's running this page, please keep doing what you're doing. I hope you get a raise, and if y'all need interns, reach out. Um, anyway, so that happened. But back to what I was saying a second ago, USAID is being shut down. They have been wasting millions of dollars, billions of dollars, trillions of dollars even in taxpayer funds to go to these insane things that don't matter to most Americans, that most Americans hear this stuff and they're like, why is my tax money going to this thing? What is the purpose? What is the purpose here? There is no purpose, of course. We've seen left wingers getting freaked out about this, screaming, shouting, pitching fits, saying that this is a travesty. How could the Trump administration shut down USAID? And some people are wondering, why is the left so insistent on going through with having these organizations that do nothing, mean nothing, have no purpose? Why are they so insistent on these things sticking around? And it's because that's where they get a lot of their funding. If you go to, there's a Twitter account called Data Republican, and they have a lot of good info. I think it's a female that runs that page. I might be wrong, but I believe it's a female. She has a lot of really good info on some of the stuff that's going on, some of the things that are happening with where this money has gone, and a lot of it is being funneled through left wing groups and through left wing NGOs to go to these ridiculous programs for one, but also to left wing causes. And that's how left wingers afford to be able to have paid protesters that just show up randomly at these random places, and they're able to afford all these crazy government projects that they have. It's actually insane. And that's why the left is freaking out about this. That's why the left is so hell bent on these programs staying in place. But obviously, we know they're fraud, they're wasteful, they're abuse, and these are things that need to be shut down. And so the Trump administration has done that. USAID has been shut down, and the blue-haired leftists are probably going to freak out about this. But in the long run, this is a good thing for America, and we need to shut down more of these programs. We need to shut down more of these wasteful spending programs, and we need to do more to combat this spending and also to take influence away from the left. If U.S. government programs are being used to fund our enemies, why would we, when we are in power, logically not want to cut off that funding and get rid of these programs, especially when they're not doing anything? It's common sense, right? You would think. But Republicans before Trump didn't want to touch it, didn't want to do anything to it, didn't want to speak about it, say anything about it, touch it, nothing. And so now, luckily, we have what we have now where it's getting shut down. We have a president who actually knows these things and is intelligent about these things. It's good to see. It's good to see. All right, speaking of good to see, we are going to move on here. I know what you guys are here for. You're here for the Eric Conn interview. I know what you're here for. So we're going to go ahead and jump into that right now. The topic we're discussing is this issue of this thing called the post-war consensus and what that means. I have linked in the description of this video on, I think it's on the YouTube inscription. If it's not on Twitter, I'll go ahead and go tweet that out while I'm doing this. But Eric is part of a podcast called The King's Hall. It's a great podcast. You should all go check it out. They did this episode on the post-war consensus a couple weeks ago, and I sat down with Eric to talk about what that is and what it means for us. So please enjoy my interview with Eric. Hey guys, I'm very excited for our guest today. I'm sure you Hey guys, I'm very excited for our guest today. I'm sure you guys will be as well. If you've been perusing Reformed Twitter, Reformed X at any amount over the past few weeks, few months, you may have heard of this concept called the post-war consensus. And if, like me, when I first heard about it, might have been a little confused about what exactly that entails, well, luckily today our guest is going to be helping cover what the post-war consensus is, what that entails, and what we as Christians going forward in the United States of America specifically can be doing about it. I am pleased to welcome from the King's Hall podcast, Mr. Eric Conn, to the Jesse Hughes Show. Eric, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
So, just to give a little bit of an overview, just tell the people who might not be familiar with you a little bit about yourself and how we got to this point.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a pastor at Refuge Church in Ogden, Utah. Went to the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary some years ago. Did not graduate with an MDiv. I always say that because people like to bring that up. So just cut that one off at the pass. Left after a couple of years. Got back into kind of my background, which was sports journalism and journalism in general. Worked at a number of gun magazines. So I was doing Peterson's Hunting, Guns and Ammo. Later worked for the NRA. Really love that. Great opportunities there. And then eventually got back into pastoring. Ended up in Ogden, Utah. So I'm executive pastor here at the church. A lot of people know Brian Sauvé and his music, and a lot of great talks and stuff that he does. So I pastor alongside him and a couple other guys here in Ogden. And then we also started a media company a few years back when I got here, which is New Christendom Press. And so we do a number of things, including Brian's music. We've also got the King's Hall podcast, which you've mentioned. And then the guys do, Haunted Cosmos, which is sort of the, that's the 500-pound, I'd say gorilla, maybe Sasquatch in the room. But that one's been really cool.
Sasquatch that's an angel that Brian was.
That's right. I don't even understand the whole lingo. Maybe it's a fae. I'm not sure. But yeah, we've had a lot of fun creating media and really trying to address things that we saw as, kind of things that were lacking on the Reformed Christian side. A lot of us are young, restless, and Reformed guys from the past who just kept, leaning into classical Reformed theology and continuing to publish books and, host podcasts to delve into that content.
Well, I was a little young when that whole thing was going on, but I can say that you guys have been instrumental in helping me lead to where I am today, which I'm thankful for. And on the topic of Brian's music, if on the day we're recording this Monday, this will probably go live Friday, but on the day we're recording this, Brian just dropped a new album, so make sure you go check that out.
He did.
But I know recently you guys had an episode about this concept of this thing we keep hearing about called the post-war consensus. Just briefly kind of explain what are you guys talking about when you use this term post-war consensus, or as others have used, international liberal order? What are kind of the basics of that?
Yeah, so a couple things on that. Just really World War I and World War II seen as a really pivotal time, not only in U.S. history, but in international history, in the unfolding sort of what we have now in the world order. So you'll hear things like globalism. That's a big part of the national debate as well. A lot of this comes out of World War II, and very understandably so. One of the things that when we offer critique on the post-war consensus, it is really important to point out that a lot of the things that happened weren't necessarily bad, and at the very least, they're certainly understandable. So, for example, you had the rise of fascism in Germany. You had Bolshevik communism, and the post-war consensus is largely a response to that. The world wars, as Pat Buchanan has called them, the civil wars of the West. Of course, all these leaders were, related to Queen Victoria in England, who was also known as sort of the grandmother of Europe. So you have, Tsar Nicholas is related to the Kaiser, is related to George in England. So a lot of interrelation between them happening. War erupts in Europe, which most people are familiar with. But then coming out of the war, it was really the post-war consensus developed over a number of decades. But essentially, how do we respond to that? And so a good resource on this that we've referenced would be like Rusty Reno's book, Return of the Strong Gods. He fundamentally says that, we responded by saying a lot of never agains, never again fascism. But this is also tied into the Christian nationalism debate because globalism was really a response to nationalism. And nationalism can go wrong, obviously Germany being sort of a case in point of, some of the pitfalls of that. but even with Russia, they were having a number of nationalistic problems with the czars. They have a very long history of contentions. They've got pogroms going on. The Jews are involved in that, and heavy persecution in Russia before even World War I. So those things are long-standing. And then coming out of World War II, it was sort of like, how do we never do that again? And so some of the post-war consensus is really a response to that. Globalism, international, the stuff that we talk about today, like why is it that we consider countries no longer as nations, but really economic zones or the propositional nation? Well, a lot of that flows out of World War II. And then really, as a Christian pastor, people would say, well, why are you interested in this sort of subject? But a lot of it is because Christianity became syncretized with this new order. You mentioned like the global international order. As I think Ben Crenshaw, that one of the articles we reference, he calls it that for American Reformer. That's a great article. Maybe you can even link that for your listeners. But really, this idea of
that and your episode.
Yeah, and we talk about it in that episode. But sort of some of the things that happen to the church were particularly interesting to us. You'll hear this all the time, sort of like we in America, we tend to talk about the Constitution. Like personally, I think it's a really good thing. I love the Constitution. Mm-hmm. But it can be elevated to a level of like, these are like the 10 commandments that came down from on high. We've also adopted as part of the post-war consensus, this kind of insipid secularism. So it's sort of like you'll hear conservatives, especially the neocon brand, they'll say things like, I'm not in favor of atheism or Islam in America, but I will die to defend the right for people to practice those things. And so we're kind of taking a look at it and saying, yeah, I don't really know if that's what biblically we ought to be pursuing nationally.
Yeah, for sure. I know I have observed just in my short time on this earth, I've seen, even when growing up, there were small little recollections. Growing up in the South, you see Christian culture kind of spread around you. And as I've gotten older, you start seeing those things start to rust away. You start seeing these institutions that were once bedrocks start to erode. And the few institutions that are left that are still holding strong, it's this it's unrelenting attack on them. I think of where I'm going to school right now, a place like Liberty, constantly in the media, constantly being just blackballed by people who don't really know why they're hating these institutions. They just know, I've been told these places are bad, and thus I must hate them because they are not tolerant, or they don't subscribe to these virtues of diversity, equity, inclusion, all this stuff, the kind of things that conservatives these days would call wokeness. But as you guys point out in the interview, or in your podcast, these issues we're dealing with today have long stemming roots that come from kind of the liberal order that most of us, especially in my age, have grown up just being indicted with and being brought up in. How do you think, or how would you guys say that these things got to be as prevalent as they are today, to the point where kids growing up in schools, this idea of this global international order is kind of the only thing that they're exposed to? They don't really know the history of our Christian civilization or how America got founded.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think a big part of it is, slowly over time, you have institutional realities that come into the fore. So one of the things that the liberal international order brought was things like global organizations, rather than being, you setting up your nation around national interest and things like this. You would have the formation of the UN and NATO and NAFTA and GATT and the Paris Climate Accords and the European Union. So kind of the idea institutionally was that if we could have these broad, spanning across nations type organizations, that it would reduce conflict. And again, just to point out, like, there was a real problem in Europe with, the powder keg of events that kicked off. Unfortunately, I think what happened was, what took the blame was like nationalism as a principle in itself, loving your people in place. Religion actually was seen as something that was, well, religion causes war. And so if we secularize everything, then it will, Rusty Reno calls them the weak gods. We have sort of the open society principles of Karl Popper that come into play following the war. But then you find guys like William F. Buckley who will embrace kind of the same things. Yes, from a more traditional Catholic perspective, and yes, certainly like anti-communistic. That was a big bent for National Review and James Burnham. But unfortunately, what happened was that also meant the weakening of like the Christian religion. And yeah, I think people have just been catechized with that. I grew up in public school as an older millennial, kind of on the bridge between Gen X and millennial in the 80s. And it really was the reality that you just grew up thinking, yeah, it's good that we have this pluralism of religion in America. We have sort of the idea of the melting pot, which sort of plays into this international order because you don't have strong nationalistic ties. Even America itself, you hear people saying today things like, what does it even mean to be, of white European descent? What does it even mean to be a Christian nation? That doesn't really mean anything. And the reality is they want it to not mean anything. And so part of that we found is just going back and reading the history. What is America? Even for our Catholic friends, I think the ones who have studied history, they'll know, like, yeah, America was predominantly a Protestant founding, heavy influence, obviously, from the Puritans. You do have some other forces, obviously Maryland and some other places where there is heavy Catholic influence, but largely a Protestant project in America and largely European. And, so looking at those things and saying, okay, maybe let's go back and read the founders. Let's understand them. One of the ways I would say, by the way, too, you'll find that in a lot of the discussions and debates happening, there are a lot of people who will say, well, based on what you're saying today and sort of this post-civil rights era that we've all grown up in, it kind of sounds like you're calling the founders like racist. And people are like, you can see people getting stuck because it's like, well, I mean, technically, by the definitions we've been given now, that would probably be true. Certainly, there's issues we would correct with any generation. But I think some of that is just going back, reading history, trying to understand what our Christian forefathers were doing. I would also say a big part of it too is where this really came to the fore for me was like reading John Calvin and his idea of a magistrate and what the magistrate should do. He should order all the earthly good toward the heavenly. And that he was a minister of God to bring about the Christian religion. So even that kind of concept is just, I think, so foreign to us today because of our catechesis, which is largely through the public school system, which is government funded.
Yeah, no, for sure. I know I've kind of experienced that a little bit myself. Just pre-liberty, I knew kind of vaguely. Yeah, there were a lot of Christian influence in the founding, but like they created this constitutional order with freedom of religion. And then it started last year actually during one of my classes when I was a senior. It was a class on the history of Christianity in America. Shout out to Dr. Sam Smith, who will be doing a conference actually with a mutual friend of ours, John Harris, in a few weeks.
Oh, cool.
But,
Yeah.
Going through that class and reading, it was a book called Did America Have a Christian Founding? I cannot remember the author to save my life right now, but that book kind of opened my eyes to, wait, there were blasphemy laws and there were things that today we wouldn't even think were imaginable in an American constitutional order. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that through judicial activism and certain things that have happened throughout the years, our Constitution has been radically redefined to what it was actually originally supposed to mean. But also some things like you guys are bringing up with after these great wars, this global international order taking aim at nationalism and saying, actually, your country doesn't matter, your people in place, they don't matter. All that matters is a GDP. Your religion, that's a great thing for you to do privately in your own life, but as soon as you bring that into the public square, it becomes a problem. And it occurs to me, and it seems to me that a lot of these things, obviously they don't happen overnight, but it seems as if the church at a time when it should have been standing strong against these things kind of just buckled to the pressure And I know you guys talked briefly about how a lot of these things slowly infiltrated the church over time, but just for my listeners, can you give another brief overview of just how the church was able to just fold to this and allow it to happen instead of standing up and fighting back?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think a big part of it, another book, if people are looking to kind of delve into this subject matter, would be Christopher Caldwell's book, The Age of Entitlement. So he kind of goes through 1964 and the civil rights era, and he will call it like we're basically living under a different constitution than the original one. This is really the birthplace of what we now know as like DEI. You're saying that there have to be, like, for example, racial quotas in hiring for the government and corporations. So it becomes institutionalized that we tend to think in terms of racial quotas and stuff like this. That, of course, had a big influence not only on the culture but the church as well. I would say too, with the church, a lot of it over time we found, Meg Basham has a book on this. Um, you have to understand, in the open society global system, and even the way that our American culture works today, you fundamentally have not just the government, okay, that's important, making cultural influence, making laws, that sort of thing. But you also have this influx of NGOs, non-government organizations, and philanthropic organizations, that are dumping huge amounts of money, and a lot of that money went to the church. And so with the money comes, hey, push this sort of thing for us. And so that's shaped a lot of the church, as we found. USAID is a big part of this. So this is the old line, right, from Bob Woodward, but follow the money, figure out where the money came from, who was giving it. And then, I think you start looking at that, and we found out over time, how did so many people, go left over time? And then you're like, oh, well, they were getting USAID money. They were going to Davos. A lot of Christian leaders, Rick Warren, these types of people were going to Davos. They were hobnobbing with the Klaus Schwabs of the world, who were, fundamentally pushing this open society stuff. There was also a shift, I think, in the American church, particularly in the OOs, of, Tim Keller was doing it, Rick Warren was doing it, sort of the social gospel stuff, where they were saying, hey, the culture finds, preaching on biblical sexuality to be, wildly offensive, and Christian household, they find that wildly offensive. Let's reorder, and they have stated documents that say this. Let's reorder things around people, around what people find to be more palatable. So it became like care for orphans, global adoption, social welfare programs. You would see a lot of, Rick, and a lot of this stuff is not necessarily bad in and of itself, right? But Rick Warren would go to Africa or have conferences at his church where they were hosting, AIDS conferences. How do we solve the AIDS, epidemic in Africa and stuff like this? So there was a shift there. And then also at the end of Young, Restless, and Reformed, you find that most of those leaders became pretty heavily involved in critical race theory. The famous Matt Chandler quotes, right, about, I'd rather hire a less qualified black man to be a pastor at our church than a more qualified Anglo. And so I think a lot of people at that time were kind of, this is where people in the conservative movement were saying, maybe we have a problem actually with CRT and wokeness. Maybe the critical race theory from the Frankfurt School ought not to be the thing that's, guiding how we form our nation. But I think just across the 20th century, really going back to the 60s would be a lot of the birthplace of this. Feminism was really pushed. Betty Friedan was a Marxist, and, studying under Erik Erikson and people at the Frankfurt School and under Freud, the descendants of Freud. So psychology makes a big inroad to American culture. So many strands you could follow, but feminism, psychology, even people who aren't Christians, like Abigail Schreier, she has a great book, Bad Therapy, talking about how, it was really psychotherapy, which was a, Freudian Marxist endeavor, really indoctrinated our youth. This is where you get transgenderism. They were the ones pushing this stuff, radical sexual liberation theology type stuff. And then that, that finds its way into the church. You have lots of churches today who have abandoned biblical counseling, and they've adopted models of farming out the counsel for their parishioners to secular psychologists. So I think you could look at any number of factors, but a lot of that is just it made its way into the church, and you didn't have enough people who are willing to say pastorally, no, this is a huge problem. We're actually not going to bring this into the church. Instead, it was pushed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a more recent example of somebody pointing this out, we think of Joe Rigney with his new book, The Sin of Empathy,
Yeah.
and how that's causing issues left and
Oh,
right
yeah.
because people are like, what do you mean empathy is a sin? And it's, you go through and we're not saying empathy itself is the sin, it's the application of people are weaponizing this to push these things like, oh, that's horrible what happened to Lincoln Riley, but we can't kick out all these people who have been here. I mean, are you serious? Or I'm sorry that your father got cut from his job because it's moving to a different country, but you don't want people to pay more for their goods, do you? Um, One thing that has been encouraging kind of to see is that there's been a lot of discussion more recently on this, not just within our own little circles, but kind of broadening nationally. It started for me when Dr. Wolf published a case for Christian nationalism back a few years ago, hearing you guys talk about some of this stuff. But even more recently, during his confirmation hearing, we have Marco Rubio talking about the post-war liberal or international order. Obviously, he's framing it in the context of the Cold War, but as you've stated, we
Yeah.
can draw the history back further. We have J.D. Vance talking about the Order of Amoris and the Order of Loves, and these ideas making inroads into the broader movement, conservatives, and also just into the broader space publicly. Seeing these things happening, do you guys think that we're starting to reach a tipping point where this idea is starting to lose its grasp, and we could be seeing a resurgence? I mean, obviously, we have seen a resurgence of things like nationalism in the past few years, not just here in America, but kind of across the globe, with some parties in certain countries in Europe starting to adopt a national identity. What do you think the next few years of this looks like in terms of the fight between those of us who would call ourselves nationalists and those who are still holding to this PWC worldview?
Yeah, I think a couple things. 2020 was pivotal. I think, guys were starting to notice this anyway, like Rusty Reno. He was kind of pointing out, I think the strong gods are coming back, by which he just means, the strength of Christianity, the strength of nationalism, a people acting in their own best interest, as kind of Stephen Wolf has identified it. But I think particularly, guys like Klaus Schwab, they were pretty outspoken. Bill Gates, that using COVID was a measure to push this, you'll own nothing and you'll love it. And the globalist elites will kind of rule you in a technocratic sort of oligarchy.
I tell you, I do not love it.
Yeah, I don't love it either.
I love not being able to get a house in a few years, that concept or anything like that. I'm not a fan.
It's actually quite horrible. So I think that because they overplayed their hand so badly during COVID, I mean, you have, even, just mass casualty rates. I think it's like a 70 plus million people died during that time period. And people are starting to question, government lockdowns, shutting down the economy. People are feeling that. And I think particularly young people, you'll notice, I'm sure you've seen the articles too, but they're like, yeah, the Gen Z, especially Gen Z young men are going to church in super high numbers like we've never seen before. And when they go, they're looking to the older forms of worship, even whether it's Eastern Orthodox or Roman Catholic or kind of the more traditional Reformed Christian church. So I think some of that, yes, I think that it's kind of the global international order is falling apart. I've been encouraged to, I think, like, as you mentioned, JD Vance is talking about things like, yeah, actually, I don't believe in a propositional nation. I believe in a nation of people in place. And yeah, there have been, abuses of those things in the past. Certainly, we need to be warned against, hating people from other countries, for example. That's definitely true. But we're also starting to say things I think that are very sane and normal, like, a Christian nation has every right to protect its borders. And one thing I do with people is I say, just break it down to the household level. Does a Christian father have a responsibility to, have his doors locked? Does he have to let everyone live in his house from all over the world? Well, obviously not. And so if the nation is just the household writ large, then it makes perfect sense that as a nation, we don't have an obligation to bring the third world into our country. In fact, that would probably destroy us. It would destroy us. And I think you're just seeing a lot of people across a lot of spectrums talk about this. Jeremy Carl, in his book, The Unprotected Class, doing really, really great work there, really on immigration and kind of DEI policies and how they actually hurt competencies within America. So yeah, I think the return to those things has been really good. I think the awakening of young people has been really encouraging to see. And I think that, the Overton window has really shifted where you can talk about these things. I also say, I think that Elon Musk buying X was pivotal. The rise of alternate media, from Joe Rogan to, even, JD Vance, his interview with Theo Vaughn was actually quite good. And so you're able to have these conversations that even in 2020, we really were not allowed to have. So in kind of this, the Lord always loves to do things like this, but when the enemy overplays their hand, as happened in 2020, it kind of backfires. And then now you're seeing this resurgence of, no, actually, like, it's a good thing that Americans should love their country. We should honor our fathers. We should be extremely grateful for the Protestant men who founded our nation. And then look at the way they did it. And it was, very Christian.
Yeah, awesome. Man, I have a ton of questions and not enough time to do this.
Yeah.
Real quick, just a brief answer because I am running close to class. One thing that often gets brought up in these kind of discussions is the role of World War II, Americans in World War II, and I've seen kind of this dual-edged sword of people talking about, this was an avoidable war. Germany, Hitler, during this time weren't the greatest people in the world, not necessarily people we wanted to be friends with, but also this sequence of events was avoidable. And I remember growing up, I kind of always loved studying World War II, and I always kind of saw it as, you see these propaganda pieces that are like showing American nationalism to recruit more troops, and we almost have like this kind of mythos around America's role in the war as like this great American triumph. How do we balance seeing America as, a victor in that war and that being something to be proud of and being proud of our troops that went and fought, while also recognizing this is something that maybe could have been avoided and the long-term consequences have not been great for the world?
Yeah, really good question. I think a big part of it is being able to be people of balance in the way that we read history. As we've said, it's not white hat, black hat. Like, just because you won a war doesn't mean everything that you did was good. For example, the OSS and the CIA and that the intel state and the propaganda machine become very powerful after World War II. We could look at that and we could say, as JFK files are being released, we're like, there were definitely some problems. MK Ultra, there's all sorts of problems that came out of it. And at the same time, I've often said to people, I think the men that stormed Omaha Beach were absolutely heroes. There's a lot of courageous men who were doing the best that they could with the knowledge and information that they were given. Certainly, fascism, communism, however you look at it, there were evils in the world. And, there's certainly like brave men stood up and opposed those things. And then you can also look at it, Pat Buchanan's book, Churchill, Hitler, and the Unnecessary War. You can also look at it and you could say, yeah, probably turning over Eastern Europe to the communist bloc was not really good. 66 million people died, at least, that we know about. And that's a real travesty. And I think the best thing to do is say, look, people are complex, history is complex. There's great points, there's low points. There's things that America did that was heroic and great, and guys who fought at Guadalcanal and Iwo Jima. I think you can look at like Japanese culture and what they were doing, even to the Chinese and other people, and it's brutal, it's horrific. And and guys will have questions too about the dropping of the atomic bombs and whether that was acceptable. And I think one of the things we have to do is just be comfortable. Excuse me, be comfortable with the debate. Be comfortable being able to say, like, yeah, I love our country. We're not perfect, but we don't want to fall into the left's ditch either, where America is the most evil, horrible, awful nation who's never done anything good. That's also not true.
Absolutely. Well, Eric, thank you so much for joining. Where can people find you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. You can check us out at newchristendompress.com. You can find all of our podcasts there, including, the upcoming conference, June 12th through 14th, Ogden. We'd love to have everybody out to that as well. Student discounts for you and your friends. Anybody who wants to come, we'd love to have you.
I know about that. Thank you
Oh,
for
yeah.
sharing that. Okay, I might have to check this out.
Absolutely. We'll have a lot of great speakers there, pastors, businessmen. We're trying to do a lot of things, economic space as well. So yeah, definitely encourage people to check that out. newchristendompress.com. You can kind of find all those resources.
All right, awesome. Thank you once again, and I hope that everybody watching has enjoyed. Thank you guys so much. So there it is, my interview with Eric Conn. And I've seen some people online talk about Eric and his associates and this idea of the post-war consensus in this negative light and try and frame it as if these guys are like somehow running cover for Hitler or anything like that. As you can tell if you watched and you listened, seems like a pretty reasonable guy. It seems like a pretty reasonable position. He even said, and we talked about, Hitler, not a great guy. The Nazi Germany, not a great place. Fascism, bad thing. And so, you know, I think he's a reasonable guy. I thought that was a good interview. I'd love to hear you guys, what you guys thought about it, your comments, anything that you took away from it, and as well, if there are any suggestions for future guest speakers and future topics to discuss on this podcast, feel free, as always, to drop a comment and tell me what do you want to hear me talk about, who do you want to hear from, who do you want to hear me talk to, and what topics do you want to hear discussed. I have some ideas and some plans, some concepts of a plan about some people who I might have on in the coming months. But that was a good conversation with Eric, and I very much appreciated his time, taking out time to have that conversation with me. And as you heard him say, they've got a conference coming up. Go to newchristendompress.com to find out more about that conference. As I understand, the theme of the conference is recapturing the American spirit of greatness, moving away from this, we've got to be careful and we've got to be safe and we can't, do things that are going to be dangerous mindset, back into the mindset of people who went and conquered mountains and valleys, settled plains, took over continents, that kind of spirit that made America the great place that we love and enjoy today. Check out newchristendompress.com. Consider going to the conference. Check out his co-host Brian Suave's new album, Awakening the Dawn. It is available on all streaming platforms. Great album. I've listened to it a few times now. Absolutely tremendous music. But thank you again, Eric, for your time. And if you guys enjoyed that, please let me know and let me know of some future guests that you'd like me to bring on the episode. That is all that we have for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, I really appreciate it. God loves you and so do I. Thank you and have a great rest of your Friday.